Have you ever placed your entire faith in one person, only to feel utterly abandoned in your darkest hour? What do you do when your only hope, your one true north in a world of chaos, arrives too late? When the greatest love you've ever known answers your desperate pleas with nothing but silence, and the person you cherish most has already been sealed in the cold, unyielding earth for 4 long days. I stood there. Before the gray, silent stone of my brother's tomb, I screamed at the universe. It was a silent scream, a shattering of the soul that made no sound. I thought that was the end of faith, the end of hope, the end of everything I had ever believed in. But I was wrong. It wasn't the end. It was merely the beginning of a story far greater than myself, a story of an impossible miracle, of a devastating betrayal born from love itself, and of a final truth more powerful, more eternal than death. A truth that transformed me, that transformed everyone it touched, and that would in its own quiet way change the world. What I'm about to share with you isn't just a story, it's a confession. It's a journey through the absolute depths of despair to find a kind of light you cannot see with your eyes. And I promise you, its conclusion is nothing you could ever predict. Before we walk this path together, I want to feel our connection across the globe. Leave a comment for me right now. Tell me what city you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I want to feel that we are in this moment together, you and I, bound by this story before it even truly begins. My story begins in Alexandria, not the Alexandria of postcards and history books, but the real Alexandria, a simmering, magnificent melting pot of cultures, faiths, and ambitions. Under the watchful gaze of the great Pharos lighthouse, the air itself was a thick brew, the scent of exotic spices from the eastern markets, the sharp, clean salt of the Mediterranean, and the faint, scholarly perfume of aging papyrus that drifted from the great library. The streets were a constant river of people, a tapestry of coarse Egyptian linen, authoritative Roman togas, elegant Greek himatians, and the humble, fringed shawls of the Jewish quarter. We all lived together, but we never truly mixed. There was a tension beneath the surface, a constant, invisible friction between the rigid order of the empire and the ancient, vibrant faiths it sought to control. In this sprawling, complicated world, my family was a small island. I am Lyra. I have always lived through my heart, searching for the deeper meaning, the poetry behind the prose of everyday life. My sister, Thea, was my complete opposite. She was the anchor of our family, a creature of logic and pragmatism. Thea believed in what she could hold, what she could count. To her, a silver denarius in the palm was worth more than 1,000 promises of a paradise unseen. She ran our household with an iron will wrapped in velvet, her sharp, intelligent eyes missing nothing, her mind ever skeptical of anything that sounded too good to be true. And then there was Ammon, our brother. He was the bridge between us, the heart of our home. He had the brilliant mind of a library scholar and the sensitive soul of a poet. He could spend hours debating the philosophies of Plato with Thea, then turn and spend hours with me contemplating the meaning of a passing cloud. It was Ammon who first brought the name Elias into our lives. Elias was not a magician or a self-proclaimed prophet. He came out of the desert, and he seemed to carry the vast, profound silence of the dunes within him. He didn't preach of angry gods or elaborate rituals. He spoke of only one thing, the inner flame, a divine spark he claimed existed within every human being. He taught that if we could only learn to tend to this flame, to shelter it from the winds of fear and doubt, we could find our own peace, our own truth, right in the midst of chaos. His words were simple, yet they fell like cool, clean water on the thirsty soil of souls parched by the harshness of the world. Ammon was utterly captivated. Lyra, he once told me, his eyes shining with a newfound clarity, Elias doesn't give us the answers. He gives us the right questions. He doesn't teach us what to believe. He teaches us how to find belief for ourselves. Naturally, my heart was open to his teachings. I felt the authenticity in his quiet gaze, the deep well of peace from which his words were drawn. But Thea, ever the pragmatist, was unconvinced. "A wanderer from the desert talking of an inner flame?" She would scoff, a wry smile on her lips. "The only flame I see is the glint of coin in the offering bowls people leave for him. Be careful, Lyra. Honeyed words are cheap. Life is much harder than that." Despite her skepticism, the bond between Elias and Ammon grew into a profound friendship. It was less like master and student, and more like two kindred spirits who had found each other across a vast expanse. I would often see them sitting together in our small courtyard garden, sometimes for an hour or more, saying nothing at all, simply watching the sun bleed across the Alexandrian sky. It seemed Elias had found in Ammon a mind pure enough to receive his most challenging ideas, and Ammon in Elias had found a teacher who could finally guide his restless, searching soul. But one day, the clear blue sky of our lives began to gather clouds. It began without warning, like a foul wind blowing in from the swamplands. Ammon fell ill. At first, it was just a fever, a mild complaint, but it escalated with terrifying speed. His skin took on a sallow, jaundiced hue, and his breathing became a labored, painful struggle. The most respected physicians in Alexandria, men who served the city's wealthiest families, came and went, shaking their heads in grim confusion. This strange, aggressive sickness was draining the very life from him, hour by hour. In our desperation, we clung to a single hope: Elias. He was teaching in a village 2 days' journey away. We dispatched our fastest rider with an urgent message, a plea for help distilled into a few stark words. "Master, the one you love is gravely ill." We didn't beg, we simply informed him. We held a naive, absolute certainty that as soon as he heard, he would drop everything and come. How could he not? The first day passed in a torment of waiting. Every clatter of hooves on the cobblestones outside sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept reassuring Thea and myself, "He will come. I know he will come." Thea said nothing, but her silence was a weight, a judgment heavier than any words. She busied herself brewing herbs, cooling Ammon's brow, doing all the practical, tangible things one does, as if to prove that physical action was the only thing that mattered. By the second day, Ammon's condition was critical. He slipped into a delirium, murmuring Elias's name in his broken dreams. And still, he had not come. The foundation of my faith began to crack. 1,000 questions tormented me. Did the message even reach him? Did something happen to him on the road? Or, and this was the thought too terrible to voice, did he simply not care enough? Thea's skepticism had now curdled into a cold, hard anger. "I told you, Lyra," she whispered fiercely by the bedside, her voice sharp as broken glass. When faced with the brutal reality of sickness and death, all this talk of an inner flame is just smoke. Where is he now when we need him? Where? I had no answer. I could only clutch Ammon's cooling hand and pray. For the first time in my life, my prayers were laced with fear and with a bitter seed of resentment. And then, late that afternoon, as the setting sun painted the sky in brutal strokes of red and orange, Ammon took his last, rattling breath. The room fell into a silence so profound it felt like a physical blow. The grief was immense, a crushing weight that obliterated everything. There was no more hope, no more waiting, only a hollow, echoing loss, and the unanswerable, agonizing question, why? We buried Ammon according to our customs, his body wrapped in white linen and spices, laid to rest in a stone-cut tomb on a nearby hillside. 4 days passed in a haze of mourning. 4 centuries. People came to offer their condolences, but their words were a meaningless drone, unable to penetrate the thick fog of our grief. My hope had turned to ash. And on the fourth day, when the raw agony had numbed into a weary paralysis, he finally arrived. Elias stood at our gate, as silent as a shadow. He wore the same simple robes, had the same tranquil eyes, but now I saw no comfort in his stillness. I saw only an unbearable distance. Thea met him first. She stood in the doorway, her body rigid with contained fury. "You're too late," she said, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion. And that very lack of feeling was the most potent expression of her rage. "It's over. Why have you come? To offer us more empty philosophies about acceptance? We don't need them." Elias looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, a deep, profound sorrow passed over his features. "I know," was all he said. I could no longer contain it. The grief, the disappointment, the love, the resentment, it all erupted at once. I ran to him and fell at his feet, the words tearing from my throat, the very same words Thea had thought but not spoken. "Master, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." It wasn't an accusation. It was the heartbroken cry of a faith that had been shattered. Elias bent down and gently helped me to my feet. His touch was surprisingly warm. "Lyra," he said, his voice low and clear, "your brother is not dead. He is only sleeping. Take me to him." His words hung in the air, a stunning absurdity. "Sleeping?" Thea let out a short, bitter laugh. "Sleeping? It has been 4 days. Do you have any idea what that means? The decay has begun. The stench." She choked on the word, her scientific, rational mind recoiling from the grotesque reality. But Elias didn't argue. He simply looked at me. And in his gaze, I saw something beyond sadness. I saw a resolve, an unspoken promise. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was madness, but a tiny, flickering ember of my heart clung to his words. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and led the way. We walked to the tomb, a small procession of mourners and curious neighbors who had begun to follow, whispering amongst themselves. The air was thick with skepticism and a morbid sense of anticipation. The great circular stone sealing the entrance stood like a full stop at the end of a life. "Roll the stone away," Elias commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried an undeniable authority. The men hesitated, looking at Thea. She shook her head vehemently. "No, the smell will be unbearable." Elias turned to her, his gaze gentle but firm. "Thea, did I not tell you that if you would only believe, you would see the glory of the light?" His question was a needle piercing the heart of her doubt. She froze, speechless. 2 of the men, compelled by his authority, stepped forward and with a great grunting effort, rolled the heavy stone aside. A wave of cool, musty air tinged with the unmistakable odor of death wafted from the dark opening. People recoiled, covering their noses. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. Either Elias's madness would be laid bare for all to see, or he stepped to the mouth of the tomb. He did not peer inside. Instead, he looked up at the sky, his lips moving in a silent prayer. Then he took a deep breath, and his voice rang out, clear and powerful, echoing across the hillside, a command that seemed to pierce the veil of death itself. "Ammon, come out!" For a heartbeat, nothing happened, only the sound of the wind. A nervous titter broke out in the crowd. Thea closed her eyes as if unable to bear the impending humiliation. And then from the blackness of the tomb came a sound, a soft shuffling, a faint rustle of cloth. A white shrouded figure appeared in the entrance, blinking in the harsh sunlight. It was Ammon. He stood there, unsteady on his feet, still wrapped in his linen burial cloths. He looked at Elias, then at us, a look of profound, sleepy confusion on his face, as if waking from a very, very long dream. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. The whispering died, the cynical smirks vanished. Everyone stood frozen, eyes wide, mouths agape. Thea's hands flew to her mouth. her rational, ordered world completely undone. I could only weep, but these were not the tears of grief. They were tears of an overwhelming, explosive joy, tears of a faith that had not only been restored, but had been reborn, forged in the fire of despair into something infinitely stronger. Elias smiled, a gentle, weary smile. "Unbind him," he said softly, "and let him go." The miracle had happened. A man, dead 4 days, had returned to the world of the living. We thought it was the ultimate victory of light over darkness. We were naive. We had no idea that this single, beautiful act of salvation had just lit the fuse on a much larger fire, a fire that would consume everything in its path. And the first to be burned would be Elias himself. The news of Ammon's resurrection did not spread like a rumor. It exploded like a shockwave across Alexandria. It was no longer a curious tale whispered in marketplaces. It became the central topic of debate at the lavish dinner parties of the elite, in the hallowed halls of the great library, and most dangerously, within the powerful, sanctimonious walls of the Serapeum, the city's greatest temple. The high priest, Ptolemy Varus, heard the news while presiding over a sacred rite. He was a large man, physically and in presence, his face perpetually set in the smug certainty of one who believes he has a monopoly on the divine. To Varus, faith was an institution, a system of order and hierarchy, with himself at its apex. Elias's miracle was not a gift from the gods. It was an act of anarchy. "Blasphemy," he hissed to his acolytes, his eyes narrowing to slits. "This is an outrage. A desert vagrant performing this dark trickery, challenging the power of the great Serapis in his own city. The gullible masses will be enchanted by this charlatan. The spiritual order we have spent centuries building will crumble. He is a cancer, and he must be cut out before he spreads." Miles away in the cold stone of the Roman garrison, the prefect, Gaius Flaccus, received his own report. Flaccus was a man of a different mold entirely. He was a soldier, a brutally practical administrator who worshipped no god but the twin deities of Roman power and Roman order. He cared little for blasphemy or miracles, but he cared immensely about one thing: crowds. "A man who can raise the dead?" Flaccus chuckled without humor, his hand resting on the hilt of his gladius. "I don't care how he does it. I care that any man who can command that kind of devotion is a threat. Today he raises one man from a tomb. Tomorrow he could raise 10,000 men in rebellion. Rome has no place for saviors. He is a spark of instability, and it is my job to extinguish sparks." And so it was that for the first time, two great competing powers, the religious authority of the temple and the military authority of Rome, found a common enemy. A secret meeting was convened late at night in a secluded villa overlooking the sea. By the flickering light of oil lamps, Ptolemy Varus and Gaius Flaccus sat across from one another. Varus spoke of heresy. Flaccus spoke of insurrection. They used different words, but they arrived at the same unspoken conclusion. Elias had to be eliminated. His death warrant was sealed, not by a court of law, but by the fearful calculus of power. His very existence, the miracle he had performed, had become his greatest crime. Meanwhile, a more intimate tragedy was unfolding within Elias's own circle of followers. Cassian, the zealot warrior whose eyes always burned with a fierce, nationalist fire, had witnessed the miracle at the tomb, but he saw it through a different lens. To him, it wasn't an act of love, it was a demonstration of power. This was the sign he had been waiting for. Elias was more than a teacher. He was the one, the prophesied king who would finally lead them to throw off the Roman yoke. One evening, Cassian sought Elias out alone in the very garden where Ammon had been restored to life. The air still seemed to hum with a sacred energy. "Master," Cassian knelt, his voice thick with a zealous fervor, "the time is now. You have shown them your power. You must give the word. 1,000 swords are ready to be drawn. We will drive the Romans into the sea. You are the king we have been waiting for." Elias looked down at the kneeling man, and his expression was not one of anger, but of infinite sadness. "Rise, Cassian," he said softly. "The kingdom I speak of is not won with swords and bloodshed. It is built with love and understanding within the heart of each person. Put away your sword." Elias's words were like ice water on Cassian's burning faith. He staggered to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief and crushing disappointment. "No, it cannot be," he stammered. "With such power at your command, you choose weakness? You could free us all. Why do you refuse?" In that moment, Cassian's heart broke. He would not betray Elias for silver or for status. He would betray him for the sake of a shattered ideal. A desperate, twisted logic began to form in his mind. Perhaps he is only testing us. If he is pushed to the brink, if his own life is threatened, then he will be forced to unleash his true divine power. He will be forced to become the king he was meant to be. And so Cassian, in the greatest tragedy of all, a tragedy of misunderstanding, cast himself as the villain of the story. He resolved to force Elias's hand. He would deliver his master to his enemies, not to destroy him, but in the deluded hope that his act of betrayal would compel Elias to save himself, and in doing so, save them all. That night, darkness fell over Alexandria like a shroud. Guided by Cassian, a detachment of Roman soldiers and temple guards marched to the garden where Elias was speaking quietly with his disciples. In the dancing, chaotic light of their torches, Cassian's face was pale, his jaw set with a terrible resolve. Cale, the big fisherman whose loyalty was as fierce and uncomplicated as the sea, saw the betrayal first. With a roar like a wounded lion, he drew a hidden dagger and lunged towards the soldiers. But Elias placed a hand on his shoulder, a gentle pressure that stopped him in his tracks. "Cale, put it away," he said, his voice calm amidst the chaos. "The cup that the light has given me, shall I not drink it?" The trial was a sham, a hurried, chaotic proceeding in the dead of night. They brought Elias before Varus and Flaccus. It was a trial of two worlds colliding. Varus, defender of the faith, accused him of sorcery and blasphemy. Flaccus, defender of the law, accused him of sedition and inciting a riot. Through it all, Elias remained silent. His silence was a mirror, reflecting the ugliness of his accusers back at them, and it only made them anger. And while this was happening in the courtyard outside, another trial, a trial of the soul, was taking place. Cale had followed them, hiding in the shadows. A servant girl recognized him. "Hey, aren't you one of his followers?" she asked, her tone more curious than accusing. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced Cale's heart. He saw the gleam of Roman steel, the cold eyes of the guards. He was afraid for his life. "No," he stammered, turning his face away. "Not me." A second time, a soldier clapped him on the back. "I'm sure I saw you with him at the docks." Cale's denial was firmer this time. "You're mistaken." And a third time, a relative of one of the temple guards pointed directly at him. "It is you. I saw you in the garden with him." "I don't know the man," Cale shouted, the lie tearing from his throat. And as the words left his lips, from somewhere in the awakening city, a rooster crowed, heralding the dawn. The sound struck Cale like a physical blow. He remembered Elias's words to him on a peaceful afternoon long ago. "Cale, your loyalty is a rock, but be careful, for even a rock can be shattered before the morning comes." He stumbled out of the courtyard into a dark alley and collapsed, sobbing. The guttural, racking sobs of a big man who had just discovered the terrifying smallness of his own spirit. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. The next morning, they marched Elias out of the city to a desolate, windswept hill overlooking the sea, forcing him to carry the heavy wooden crossbeam. Myself, Thea, and a few other heartbroken disciples followed at a distance. I will not describe the brutality of the crucifixion. Words are inadequate for such things. I want to tell you instead of the profound, terrible stillness on that hill. Under the merciless Egyptian sun, with the jeers of the crowd and the cry of the gulls mixing in the wind, Elias seemed to recede into a place of impossible peace. He looked down at us, the small, pathetic cluster of his followers. His gaze was not one of agony, but of a father looking upon his soon-to-be orphaned children. He looked at me, he looked at Thea, he looked out and found Kyle standing far off, his giant frame shaking with guilt. And then he whispered his final words. They were not a cry of despair or a plea for mercy. They were a secret, a promise meant only for the hearts that were open to hearing it. His voice was faint, almost lost in the wind, but I heard it. I will never forget it. The flame is never extinguished. Then he bowed his head and his spirit departed. The world seemed to hold its breath. Our lighthouse was gone and we were plunged into darkness. The next dawn broke on a shattered world. Late the previous evening, after securing a reluctant permission from Flaccus, we had taken Elias's body down from the cross and laid him in a tomb belonging to a sympathizer. I hadn't slept. As the first pale light touched the rooftops of Alexandria, I walked alone to the tomb. I don't know why I went, perhaps to weep, perhaps to feel some final connection. But when I arrived, my heart stopped. The great stone, the one that had taken several strong men to move, was rolled away. The entrance to the tomb gaped open, a black, silent mouth. A new kind of fear, sharp and cold, eclipsed my grief. I ran to the opening and peered inside. It was empty, utterly empty. There was nothing but the folded linen cloths lying neatly where his body should have been. There were no angels, no celestial light, no explanation, just a hollow space and a terrifying, absolute silence. I turned and fled back to the city, my mind a maelstrom of confusion. "They've taken him! They've taken his body!" I cried when I found Kyle and the others huddled together in a hidden room. This news brought no hope. It was just more fuel for our fear and despair. "It was the Romans," one disciple whispered, his face ashen. "They were afraid we would steal the body and claim he had risen to start a rebellion." "No, it was the priests of the Serapeum," another argued. "They wanted to destroy any trace of him, to erase him from history." Even Thea, my rational sister, when she heard the news, simply shook her head with a bitter, knowing smile. "I knew it," she said, her voice laced with the weary cynicism of someone whose worst fears had been confirmed. It was all a performance, the raising of Ammon, and now this disappearing act. Perhaps he arranged it all himself, a grand escape, a great deception from start to finish. Her words were the final blow. They severed the last tenuous thread of hope. It was over. Elias was dead and gone. His legacy was a controversial miracle and a mysterious, empty tomb. His disciples were scattered and broken. Our faith was extinguished. We had reached the absolute bottom. But it is there, in the deepest, darkest point of utter despair, that the real story, the final twist, began. The true resurrection was not the return of Elias in the flesh. It was what began to happen inside of us, his broken followers. I was the first to feel it. Days later, I was sitting in our garden, watching Ammon read a scroll. He was still pale, but he was alive. He was breathing. His very presence was a quiet, enduring miracle, a fact that no cynicism could erase. And suddenly Elias's last words echoed in my mind, as clear as if he were standing beside me. "The flame is never extinguished." And in that instant, I understood. The flame wasn't him. It wasn't a promise that his physical body would return. The flame was his legacy. It was the love, the forgiveness, the spark of inner light he had ignited in each of us. That couldn't be crucified. That couldn't be buried in a tomb. Elias wasn't the flame itself. He was the one who had brought the match. And now it was our task to keep that flame from dying out. I stopped weeping. For the first time in days, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I had found my purpose. I would be the storyteller. I would be the keeper of the memory. I would tend to the flame. The second resurrection happened in Kael. He was still drowning in guilt, isolating himself in the darkness of his shame. But then he remembered something else Elias had told him long ago. When you are at your strongest, Kael, your task is to protect the weakest. He realized that wallowing in his own failure was the ultimate betrayal of that trust. He got up and he went out. He began to search for the other disciples, scattered and terrified throughout the city. He didn't preach. He just sat with them. He shared his last piece of bread. He listened to their fears, and in healing others, he began to heal himself. His loyalty was no longer a blind, ferocious thing. It had been tempered by failure into a quiet, humble strength. But perhaps the greatest miracle of all happened to Thea. She had no vision, no voice from the heavens. She simply observed. She saw me, her emotional, fragile sister, somehow find a core of unshakable peace. She saw Kael, the rough-edged fisherman, transformed into a patient and compassionate leader. She saw broken people beginning to come together, not to mourn what they had lost, but to build something new with what they had left. As a woman of reason, Thea saw an effect for which there was no logical cause. How could these people, who had lost everything, find such strength? And then she, too, understood. The greatest miracle Elias had ever performed was not raising Ammon from the tomb. It was raising hope from the ashes of broken hearts. Thea's faith was finally born, not from seeing an impossible wonder, but from witnessing the quiet, undeniable power of love and resilience. A few weeks later, a small group of us gathered at dusk. It was the first time we had all been together since that terrible night. We met in the very room where Ammon had died. I was there, and Kael and Thea. Ammon was there, a quiet smile on his face. The fear was still present, a ghost in the corner of the room, but the despair was gone. We shared simple stories of Elias, small memories, a funny thing he had said, a lesson he had taught. We broke bread together, and as we did, a palpable sense of warmth and peace filled the room, as if an unseen presence was there with us. We looked at each other, and in each other's eyes, we saw it. The flame. It was burning in me. It was burning in Kael, and for the very first time I saw it flickering, soft but steady, in the eyes of my sister Thea. We finally understood. Elias hadn't left us. He had become a part of us. He lived on in the courage of a man who had known cowardice. He lived on in the faith of a woman who had known only doubt. He lived on in the story we would now spend the rest of our lives telling. His legacy wasn't a kingdom or a religion. It was a single unquenchable flame, passed from one heart to the next. And that flame would never be extinguished. The story I've just told you isn't just a memory from the past. It's a reminder that even in the most profound darkness, a single spark of hope, of love, of courage can change everything. That flame he spoke of still exists. It exists in all of us. Here on our channel, we believe in the power of stories like this, stories that ignite that flame, that connect us as human beings. If you felt something listening to this, if you want to be part of a community that seeks out and cherishes these flames of hope, then I invite you to do one simple thing. Click the subscribe button. When you do, you're not just following a channel, you're joining us in our mission to keep this fire burning brightly. Thank you for listening.